Still haunted by Jaime Lannister's unresolved storyline? You're not alone. That cliffhanger ending for one of Game of Thrones' most beloved characters left millions of us wanting more. We're sifting through the whispers, the clues, and the most brilliant fan theories to uncover exactly what could have happened to Jaime after the dust settled in King's Landing. Your lingering questions are about to be answered. Because, let's be honest, Jaime's finale never felt like a true conclusion. It felt like a curtain drop mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-heartbeat. One moment, he was a man reborn by choice, tragedy, and severe self-awareness. The next, he was trapped beneath falling stone, reaching for Cersei as the city collapsed around them. Holekot. End of chapter. But not end of story. Not for a character built on reinvention. To understand why audiences still wrestle with his ending, we need to acknowledge the truth woven into his art from the beginning. Jaime Lannister was never written to be static. He was written to disrupt the narrative every time we thought we finally understood him. He began as the man we loved to hate. A golden knight who shoved a child out a window, broke oaths without shame, insulted honor like it was beneath him. And then slowly, cleverly, brutally, the story stripped even his arrogance of armor. A sword hand severed. A reputation interrogated. A conscience awakened. The Kingslayer becomes the Kingsguard, who finally understands what a king should be guarded from. He becomes the brother who questions, not obeys. The knight who chooses, not defaults. The man who learns that honor is not a title, but a cost. So when his arc bent backward towards Cersei, it didn't feel tragic. It felt unfinished, because the story was still asking questions when the soundtrack ended. The fandom felt it immediately, because every Lannister is many things, but Jaime was the only one whose destiny felt self-authored. Tyrion reacted. So let's walk into the first fork in the road the writers never let us see. The most persistent fan theory, backed by narrative symmetry and emotional logic, is that Jaime did not die beneath the Red Keep. Not truly. Not narratively. The collapse that supposedly entombs him and Cersei happens off-screen. And in storytelling law, if the death isn't witnessed, it isn't canon, it's conjecture. This is a world where characters have survived stab wounds, sorcery, dragonfire, poison, combat pits, and the undead. But stone rubble, conveniently cut to black, that is not death. That is opportunity. One interpretation suggests escape through the very tunnels used for smuggling secrets into King's Landing for generations. A city built on conspiracy always contains exits for those who understand its anatomy. Jaime, raised within its walls, trained in its underbelly of politics and passageways, would know routes others could never see. And rescuing Cersei was his stated goal, not dying theatrically beside her. Escape fits motive. It fits skill. It fits character. But survival alone isn't the compelling part. The question is, what happens after? Here is where the theories deepen from rescue mission to redemption thesis. One idea popular among narrative purists is that Jaime survives Cersei but fails to save her. Not by betrayal, but through the painful mathematics of consequence. Cersei does not die because he stops loving her. She dies because the world will no longer bend around her desires. In this telling, Jaime crawls out of the ruin carrying grief instead of victory. He stays alive precisely because he cannot outrun guilt or love. No Phoenix moment, just ash and accountability. This version aligns with the recurring Lannister motif: debts, paid or unpaid. Jaime's debt was not Cersei's survival. It was justice delayed. He lived long enough to begin paying. Living longer would mean paying more. Another theory takes the opposite emotional stance but reaches the same outcome: survival. In this telling, Jaime deliberately leaves King's Landing alone, believing Cersei remains inside, only to realize too late that she never made it. This Jaime doesn't die under the Red Keep because his tragedy isn't death. His tragedy is irony. The man who lived for love loses it, not in battle, but in timing. The man who jumped into fire for his sister ends up living in a world without her. And where does a broken knight go when the empire he knew is gone? The dynasty dissolved, the mythology exhausted, always north. There are compelling hints tying Jaime to the north thematically, if not textually. The north forgave him when no one else would. Brienne believed in a version of him that no one else could imagine. Honor was not found at Casterly Rock. It was forged in snow, humility, and swords raised for strangers instead of crowns. In one of the most poetic continuations imagined by fans, Jaime returns not to lead, but to serve. Not to rekindle romance, but to complete narrative symmetry. He doesn't reclaim gold or glory. He trains knights. He finishes the chapter Brienne began in the Book of Brothers, not in ink, but in action. The Kingslayer becomes the Oath Keeper in the most literal sense, someone who ensures the next generation understands that honor is not a reputation, but a decision made daily, quietly, without applause. Then there is the radical subversion theory, the one that treats Jaime not as a man concluding, but as a legend transitioning. In this interpretation, Jaime is last seen drifting east, beyond Westeros entirely, lands where Lannister means nothing, Kingslayer means nothing, gold means nothing. Places where a man can exist without being overshadowed by his past titles, scandals, sins, or surnames. The ultimate reinvention is not redemption or return. It is anonymity. The boy raised to be a legacy becomes a man with no audience, no castle, no mythology. To this choice. And perhaps that is why the ending felt hollow. We were denied the choice, not the outcome. Jaime Lannister's entire arc was about agency wrestled from destiny. When the story ended without granting him the final pivot, the audience felt robbed, because his evolution demanded a last decision, not a last debris shot. Maybe he died, maybe he walked away. But one thing remains undeniable. His story was not about dying beautifully. It was about becoming unpredictably, because Jaime Lannister was never meant to be remembered for where he ended. He was meant to be remembered for every time he refused to end where the world assumed he would. And that is why, years later, we are still telling the rest of his story for him. Jaime Lannister's supposed final moment in Game of Thrones didn't conclude his story. It detonated a debate. For a character whose entire narrative was built on defined categories, expectations, and destiny, the conclusion felt too neat, too quiet, too finished, for a man who was never designed to end tidily. This is where the true legacy of Jaime begins, not beneath the Red Keep's rubble, but in the cultural ruins left behind when the screen faded to black. Let's revisit the moment, not as a matter of plot, but as evidence in a case file. The Red Keep lacks structural integrity in its final moments. The map room collapses. Dust explodes like a pyroclastic cloud. Cersei panics. Jaime reaches for her. The ceiling comes down. So, the frame tightens. His face is streaked with ash, resignation, something approaching peace, or maybe exhaustion. They die together. It's tragic. It's poetic. It's symmetrical. But it is also suspiciously off-screen. In a story universe that lingered lovingly on deaths both noble and ignoble, Viserys crowned in molten gold, Oberyn crushed like fruit, Ned Stark kneeling before the public axe, Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, the most narratively dynamic member of the Lannister dynasty, receives the cinematic equivalent of someone saying, "Trust me, he's gone." History does not work that way. Stories do not work that way. Legends definitely do not work that way. And so the doubt seated itself immediately. The controversy surrounding his end wasn't born from outrage alone, but from dissonance. Jaime's arc was one of agonizing transformation. He was the man the world assumed it understood until he violently corrected it. The knight who defied oaths to do the right thing. The brother who left home to defend truth, not legacy. The swordsman who became less dangerous when he gained compassion instead of skill. His most consistent trait was not loyalty or love or arrogance. It was contradiction in motion. And yet the end presented him like a period instead of a question mark. Fans pushed back because Jaime Lannister had never been a period. He was a hinge, a pivot point, a man whose entire story was about the impossibility of remaining who you once were. What the scene offered was closure for Cersei, not resolution for Jaime. Cersei died exactly as she lived, the world collapsing around her, clinging to someone she believed was hers to the end. But Jaime died in a way that suggested nothing new, revealed nothing more, asked nothing further. All the momentum, all the moral recalibration, all the identity unraveling, all the searching for a name that wasn't forged in his father's shadow. It ended without payoff, and audiences instinctively sensed the narrative malpractice. Because Jaime's story was not about death, it was about revision. Let us examine the anatomy of narrative expectation. Certain characters are engines. Their endings must either resolve a central theme, invert it, or transcend it. For Jaime, the central theme was not love, oath-breaking, or kinship. It was choice against gravity, the gravitational force of Lannister gold. Lannister legacy, Lannister expectation, Lannister sin. He spent 8 seasons fighting narrative undertow to conclude his story by having him simply sink felt like gravity winning by default, not consequence. This is why the fandom fracture was so volcanic. It wasn't grief. It was incongruency. Then came the questions that would outlive the finale itself. Did we actually see him die? Was it explicitly confirmed in universe? No body, no funeral, no aftermath, no witness, no record, no acknowledgement. Tyrion identifies rubble, not remains. In storytelling law, rubble is alibi, not evidence. Was his character arc finished? Not even close. He hadn't reckoned with Brienne, with his own knighthood redefined, with the difference between leaving power and extinguishing identity. His narrative ledger had balances remaining. Was his death thematically necessary? Only if the message was futility. And Jaime's entire arc argued against futility. He was living proof that self-revision is possible even when the world has written you off. Thus began the second life of Jaime Lannister, the investigation. Fans did what storytellers had refused to do. They read the scene like historians instead of consumers. They analyzed debris patterns, architectural logistics, structural collapse timelines, survivor plausibility, underground egress systems, character motivation, mythic storytelling precedent, and narrative symmetry. They asked practical questions. Would the Red Keep collapse inward or outward? Did Jaime know escape routes Tyrion referenced in earlier seasons? Was the map room near known subterranean passages? Would a man trained to assess tactical terrain simply stand still and accept a ceiling as fate? Was the framing more poetic than forensic by design? They asked literary questions. Why build a redemption arc spanning multiple seasons only to nullify it? Why separate Jaime from Casterly Rock, Jaime from Cersei's narrative control, Jaime from his father's ghost, if not to let him become someone the story had not yet named? Why mirror his beginning defying a king, defying expectation, without granting him a final self-directed act equally disruptive? They asked mythic questions. Isn't the most Lannister ending not death in rubbles, but survival against expectation? Doesn't the Kingslayer deserve an ending that forces history to argue about him forever, not instantly file him away? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Jaime Lannister should not be easy to summarize. His legacy should fracture people. His conclusion should be debated in inns, in history books, in songs that disagree with one another. And perhaps that is the only true closure we received. Not a clean ending, but an enduring question. The show wanted us to witness a death. The audience remembered a possibility. The writers offered rubble. The fandom unearthed a narrative. Because Jaime never belonged to certainty. He belonged to ambiguity, to messy transformation, to the space between legend and liability, to the uncomfortable truth that a person can be both heroic and destructive, both evolving and regressing, both saved and self-sabotaging, both worthy of belief and impossible to trust fully. So if we feel unfinished, it's not because we failed to understand his ending. It's because we understood Jaime too well. He was never the type of man who goes quietly beneath stones. He was the type history argues over forever. And the fact that we are still excavating answers is the proof. Jaime Lannister did not end with rubble. He ended with interrogation marks, with doubt as inheritance, with debate as monument, which, for a man carved out of contradictions, is the most truthful ending he could ever have.